Welcome to yet another edition of Still Uncaptured with myself, Undumiso Wakangcobo, iqadi lasemaqadini, and
Me, Khumuzo, Louisa Matsunyane. I wanted to say to you, why is it Mapoloba, Ekadi?
Ekadi.
Where's Humphrey?
Hey,
Where is Humphrey?
Okay, guys, you cut that out, right? You cut that out.
No, we're not.
Yeah, you know when someone calls and says, "Am I speaking to Ndumiso Humphrey?" Oh, that's a debt collector. You just know.
Because nobody who loves you calls you Humphrey.
Exactly. And speaking of debt, the conversation that we are having today requires us, Khumuzo, because you and I are so bloody opinionated. We think we know everything. We want to talk about everything. Now we're talking about grief. Next thing we're talking about this, and then we also want to delve into economics and the state of the nation. So we decided that because when we had the first edition of Uncaptured, we had someone that we always used to, our go-to guy,
Mhm.
to make sense of the numbers, to also check our thinking as well.
Right.
And this is why right now we have Duma Gqubule, who is amongst many other things an economist who helps us make sense of the world around us. Welcome to the show, Duma.
Guys, I am so happy for you. And before we start, I just have to tell you that I used to listen to the station of Clever Blacks.
Yes.
And then you guys made me change to Kaya FM. Yeah.
Wow.
Because, yeah. I was a new recruit because of you guys. Being like Clever Blacks before.
Yes, because of Nalingondo.
So no, but I'm so happy for you guys. I was telling Dumiso on the phone that I'm so happy. All the best for you. Yeah.
Thank you very
man,
much.
thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, Duma, we want to make sense. And so what this episode is really for us, the true state of the nation. This conversation is about the true state of the nation of South Africa from an economics point of view. And how it started is we were just talking about employment
And unemployment.
and employability
And underemployment.
And so on. And we said on air, we said, we got to get someone to help make sense of where we are, the true picture. Please paint for us a picture of unemployment in South Africa. What is a lie? What is true? What is not true? What is that number? Can we just start with just talking about numbers? How many people are truly unemployed in this country?
Guys, thank you so much. It's a favorite topic of mine. Over the past 3 years, I've really delved into this issue of unemployment with an organization called Youth Capital. And it is, you know what, I'm getting really angry with South Africans for normalizing this crisis. So the numbers you asked for is that we currently have 12.3 million unemployed people. The unemployment rate is 41.9% for people of all races. It's 46% for Africans. It's 50.1% for African women. Can I repeat that? It's 50.1% for African women. For young people, it's 70.7%. And people are constantly making excuses for this government and this crisis of unemployment. I could go further. I asked Stats SA regularly to give me additional statistics the way I want them. And graduate unemployment, third quarter, was 1 million people with tertiary qualifications. So
A million?
A million, yeah. Tertiary qualifications. So what that means to me is that this is not, there's a skills mismatch theory of unemployment. It is a fallacy. It's not about skills. We have a huge unemployment rate. And then people say, no, there's unemployment everywhere in the world. The world average unemployment rate is 5.1%. There are 80 countries, more than 80 countries. I went and counted on the ILO website. How many countries have got full employment, which I define as an unemployment rate of less than 5%? There were more than 80 countries which are at full employment. And we South Africans, it's either we want to solve the crisis or we don't want to solve the crisis. Now, I look at it the last 15 years. So people need to understand the drivers of this unemployment crisis. The first one is the labor force growth rate. So the people entering the labor force every year. So the last 16 years, because we've now got 16 years of data from December 2018 to December 2024, 8.7 million people entered the labor force. But we created only 2.3 million jobs. And only 1.4 million of those jobs were in the formal sector. So we created less than 100,000 formal sector jobs every year for 16 years. So we are not creating enough jobs. So the number of unemployed people soared by 6.3 million people to 12.3 million. So this is the crisis that we have today. And I was really surprised. State of the Nation address, replied to the State of the Nation address. I watched it for about 2 days. None of the political parties are talking about this unemployment crisis. You know, before the elections, I was invited by the ANC's elections team to talk, you know, and one of the ministers, Ibrahim Patel, says, no, we've got to tell everybody a good story to tell. You know, Ndumiso and
A
Khomotso,
good story to tell.
a good story to tell. Khomotso, guys, and Ndumiso, I flipped. I stopped behaving. And I said, you have to put the number one issue in this country is unemployment. And if you're not going to tell us about unemployment in your manifesto, it's not worth the paper it's written on. So they put in a target for, I think, 2.5 million work opportunities. Yeah. So I'm just saying that I would like to think I influence it, but maybe not, you know. But yeah. But the point what I'm trying to say is that I listen to all the political parties in parliament. None of them are talking about this unemployment crisis.
Because I get they're part of the
They're
GNU
employed
now.
and they're employed as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they're part of the GNU. Yeah.
But root cause analysis, I believe in this root cause analysis where you have to ask at least 5 why questions. Why? When you come right to the 5th why, why do we have this problem in South Africa? Because I mean, I remember saying, I think in the previous episode, that I remember Zwelinzima Mavavi saying, throwing numbers like at some point, I think probably about 11, 12 years ago, talking about the fact that South Africa actually boasts something like close to 10% of the global unemployed. For a country of 60 million, guys, we're such a small nation. We've got nations that have got 1.5 billion people, but we are accounting for about 10% of, what is the figure now?
We are we are number 2 in the world, the highest unemployment rate. Eswatini is number 1. I was shocked because I went to school at Swatini at Waterford. Kamhlaba School. Let's plug them.
Plug them in
Let's
there.
plug them. Yeah, great school I went to. One of the best in the world. But anyway, so I was phoning my people from school. Guti, what happened in the last few years at Swatini? Then I looked around in the region. When we saw Botswana, you know, Botswana grew by about 8.8% from independence to 2008. It's an economic growth miracle, but then I looked at the unemployment rate. I said, Botswana, why is it so high after all these alleged achievements? So what I'm trying to say is that we mustn't normalize this unemployment crisis. Root cause. I can see you worked for a consulting firm.
I did. As a matter of fact, I did.
Yeah. So now the root cause, our economy has not grown fast enough to create jobs for the new entrants into the labor force and the people who were previously unemployed. So in December 2008, there were 5.9 million people who were previously unemployed. And then we added another 8.7 million people. So that we haven't created enough jobs for growth, both those people. That's number 1. Now, I've sliced the data each way you like. So it is, there's something called an employment multiplier. It's a relationship between GDP growth and jobs. Now, we used to talk about jobless growth. I have to tell South Africa, there has been no jobless growth. I remember about a year, just before the ANC conference, I had a meeting with President Mbeki. And I said, you know, I have to apologize. You know, I'm one of the people who used to write about jobless growth until I asked Stats SA to send me the statistics the way I want them for the past 20 plus years. And I looked at the numbers and no, there was no jobless growth. Though there was a period from 2003, March 2003 to December
sense.
2008, when we grew by 4.5% a year, and we created 3.1 million jobs, and the number of unemployed people came down from 40.6% to 28.7%. So we did create jobs during that period. So what has happened now, so I've sliced the data, whichever way you look at it, for the past 30 years. Now, there's a relationship between GDP growth and jobs. I believe it's an employment multiplier. It's 0.9. So what that means is that when GDP growth 1% on average,
Yes.
Employment increases by 1%, 0.9%. Sorry, yeah. So that's the employment multiplier. So we're not growing fast enough to create those jobs. Yeah. So that's number one. So number two is that when I project unemployment until 2035, I have a presentation that I gave to many South Africans. It's called Vision 2035, a plan to achieve full employment. So I project until 2035, there's going to be plus 740,000 new entrants into the labor force every year until 2035. Yeah. So for us to create jobs just for those new entrants, we, how can I put it? We have to create, have a growth rate of 4%. Now, sorry, I'm just jumping around. So I want to talk about this.
I'm following you.
No, sorry, the second period, I got it from 2003 to 2008. Yes. We created these 3.1 million jobs, and the employment multiplier was 0.9. Now, during the second period, what happened is that we created 2.3 million jobs. But so the employment multiplier was 0.9 again. But there's a catch there, is that we created 3 million jobs for older people, 35 to 64, and 700,000 young people lost their jobs. So there was jobless growth for young people, but not jobless growth for the whole economy. So I've been trying to understand why would, during the earlier period, we had equal employment multipliers for old people and young people. Of the 3.1 million jobs we created, half were for older people and half were for younger people. So then you have to ask why. So you have to, I don't know, there's some theories that maybe in an economy that's not growing, when the economy is growing, they're scrambling for everyone. But when the economy is not growing, they can pick and choose. That's my only, So they can pick and choose, put unreasonable qualification requirements, and, they...
Is it a form of protectionism from...
No, I just think it's really. Like, suppose like you've got, a friend of mine, they manage this PPP at the DIRCO, and they put out one job advert, and thousands of people applied for that job, these jobs at DIRCO. And then, obviously, if you've got 10,000 CVs, then you can pick and choose. And you know what I'm saying? Yeah. So that's what but I don't have evidence that that's the case. But I believe that companies, if you see in the US, during tough times, companies can pick and choose and put, you can be, you want to work at a retail outlet, say we want a degree, they can put unreasonable requirements. So the youth unemployment crisis is huge in South Africa. So now I've project until 2035. We have to grow by 4% just to create jobs for the new entrants into the labor force. Number two, we have to have a GDP growth rate of 6% to now eat into the unemployment crisis. And our current, and then we have to create 1.6 million jobs a year until 2035 to achieve full employment. But now, guys, I don't believe in half measures. I believe that it's either we want to solve this crisis or we don't. So that's what I'm trying to say, is that I don't believe in half measures. I don't have the time to be, giving half measures to people. I say, what you ask for the root cause, I say, what is the solution?
Okay, so we hear you. Yeah. But for me, what is going on right now, I don't believe that we have a government that is capable.
Yes.
Or able to...
Or willing.
Most importantly, willing. Yeah. Willing to do that 4% growth rate that we need in order to create... our game is incapable. Let's be honest.
Yes. So now, let's look at it. We grew by 4.5% during the earlier period when you created jobs. So the last 16 years, 2009 to 2024, 1.1%. What does that mean in practice? It means that because our population is growing by more than 1.1%, it means in per capita terms, we've had average. So if you look in 2007, sorry, 2024, our GDP per capita, it's GDP divided by the number of people. It's an imperfect measure of average living standards. It is lower than it was in 2007. So now it is forecast to have declined in 2024 and in 2025. So by the end of this year, 2025, we'll have had 18 years of declining average living standards. That is a shocking performance.
How many years?
18 years.
That's a disaster.
Yeah,
But
we
you
can't.
but you feel it.
Yeah, you feel it everywhere.
You
Yeah, you feel it everywhere.
18 years ago, I realized that I used to complain about things and about the economy and affording anything. I realized I was actually living in the lap of
You're
luxury.
living la vida loca.
I was.
I'm telling you.
You might remember that in those days,
Yeah.
when Dumiso, you had the BE crowd,
Yeah.
Nandi, and they used to wear these pink shirts, the two-tone baggy
With the
shirts,
white collars.
with the white collars. And then when you look back
God.
at the time, I didn't
Yeah.
feel like anything special was happening. But when you look back to this disaster of the last 16 years, that those were the good times because your BE, they were feeling, there's a spring in their step and people were getting work. I just on a lighter note, there's a guy called Clement, he used to work in our house, because, his father worked for ANC, and Clement got a job during that period. Clement was, everybody got a job, and not everybody, but a lot of people got jobs, But anyway, so this government is completely incapable of creating jobs. The GNU as well. There is no plan to create these jobs, Khomots, and that is unacceptable. We have to call them out. And there's no plan to get this 1.1% GDP growth better. You will see it in the budget. There's no plan whatsoever. Yeah.
And now, I mean, by the time this podcast goes out, we will already know, right? Something quite unprecedented happened a couple of weeks ago when the budget speech was postponed. Right? And everybody was thinking like, WTF, like what is going on here? And I want you to put a bit of a crystal ball. By the time this airs, we will kind of know. But there were two things that were worrying me a lot. As somebody who 18 years ago, I didn't care about the price. I didn't know how much bread was. I didn't know how much milk was.
No,
if I wanted it, I could have it. Do you understand? I'm, moderately educated, tertiary, international qualifications and all that.
Don't be modest. Don't be modest. Don't be modest.
Private college in the US and all.
And so I'm luckier than most South Africans.
Yes.
Right? I can speak English with my nose. Do you understand? I have a lot of advantages.
You know people in 17, 18 different countries.
I knew about her before she knew. I knew her.
I'm somewhat infamous.
I knew about her before.
And yet.
It's been a struggle the last 5 years in particular. Since COVID. I've seen a complete decline in my financial situation and financial health. I had bought a building and failed.
I remember you told me about it.
And failed to make it work, essentially, because it's supposed to be a social building. And this happened, I bought it like 5 months before COVID hit.
Yes, I remember,
And so somewhere where I could potentially hire people, wanted to be an employer of people to be able to contribute sort of like to the economy. Things happened. I'm finding it difficult. I hand in a CV. I don't even get a call back, which is unheard of for me.
Yes.
I'm spoiled. I will give you that. I'm spoiled in the sense that I've been lucky enough in my life to be able to
work
get
for Oprah.
Stop it.
That's when I first heard about it.
I've been able to get really incredible jobs that I wanted. Now I don't even get like shortlisted
TV production
and
jobs,
I'm looking at TV production job, all of that stuff. I've been a trendsetter, like a fire starter in my own field. And now I'm sort of like nobody. So I'm wondering, like, if I, supposedly somebody, am struggling now, how is the average South African, where there are more people in the household who are now unemployed or underemployed? The quality of the jobs that they have is rubbish, the standard of living gets lower for us every time because a basket of food is unimaginably expensive. You know, basic things.
And so circling back to the VAT question, right?
Yes.
The increase. I mean, the last one I think was just, it was just slipped almost under the jaw.
You're gonna be all right.
It was during Ramaphoria. Remember, 2018. He just, we'd had the 9 wasted years, and everyone was talking about Ramaphosa's going to fix things. So they took it up from 14 to 15%. So the question for me, because you started the conversation about that, right? And like we say by the time this airs, probably we will know. Is there somewhere else where this government, where Treasury could have generated the amount of money that they hope to get out of this increase from 15 to 17%? Are there better options?
Just to answer both questions. Now, on the budget day, my son just said, Dad, I'm not feeling well. The weather's horrendous. And he says, I'm just going to go for one class and come back. So I said, I'm going to join you. I'm not feeling well. So I took the day off and I canceled all the media interviews. And then by 11:30, I hear that, there's an emergency cabinet meeting. And then a friend of mine, someone I know, Rachel, just begged me to appear on a Cape Town station. And I immediately knew it's going to be cancelled. And then I went, So just to cut a long story short about this budget, the first thing, Ndumiso and Khomotso, we are growing at 1.1% a year.
Yeah.
Who is responsible? It's National Treasury and the Reserve Bank. Those are the two most important institutions in our country in terms of the economy. So if we're not growing, and over the same 16-year period, 155 emerging and developing countries cruised to an annual average GDP growth rate of 4.4%. And emerging and developing Asia, 30 countries, 6.3%. So
and that's the norm.
That's the norm.
For like economies.
So what I'm trying to say is that this chronically low GDP growth rate over such a long period is unique for a country that is not at war. During this period, Ethiopia went to war in Tigray, but they were still growing, much faster than us, and many other countries, So that's the first thing. We must put the blame where it belongs. National Treasury and the Reserve Bank. So Treasury and the Reserve Bank are to blame. That's the background to this VAT. Now, back to the VAT increase, is that, first of all, I was really surprised. I didn't think that there would be a VAT increase because I remember, as Ndumiso was talking, that 2018 VAT increase. Now, Treasury from 2020, they're saying, no, this thing has never worked. It didn't work. We didn't collect as much as we thought we would collect. And Treasury seemed traumatized by the experience of that VAT increase. And then 2020 to 2024, every single year, they're saying this thing didn't work. So now, what happened to evidence-based policy making? Jiggy. Next thing, we are now having a VAT increase out of the blue. Now, the second thing I have to say is that in the past one, whenever there's a tax increase or a change, they warn us ahead of time.
Right.
So they start, throwing this thing out there before even the VAT one. They throw it out there. Yeah. There was a panel to look into, economists to look into this thing about exemptions, and they give you warning. So that's the first thing so they give you warning, but this one came out of the blue without warning. And then the last thing I want to say is that this is an organization that is arrogant. So this is how they've rolled for the past 15 years. They used to go there, not tell ANC, they've got a disdain for the ANC, which put them in there. Yeah. And they go there to the day of the budget. They've told nobody in their own ANC cabinet.
So that's actually true.
Yeah, the Ikuniso came out. They used to go there without telling anybody what is actually in the budget. And then the compliant cabinet ministers, none of them would complain. So they just are rocked up in Cape Town like business as usual in the middle of this economic crisis. And they shocked us with this 2% VAT increase, a Domkop VAT increase just before the local government elections. Do these people want to stay in power? No, they don't, So
I don't think they should stay in power. The average South African,
they don't want to be in power. So South Africans, we must help them out of this situation.
Because for me, then what's interesting, but I think let's shelve this because we just want to take a bit of a water break, and when we come back, I want to ask you a question precisely about just that particular thought.
Yeah.
We'll be back just now.
Welcome back to Still Uncaptured. We've taken a bit of a breather because the conversation here in the studio is hot. When we went away, you were talking about the fact that there seems to be almost zero political will. Part of why we brought you in here is because sometimes when we talk about these things, we get really, really worked up and so on. And and I was kind of hoping, and I was worried that you might be wanting to temper us down. So I love the fact that you are matching our energy about this. And you were talking about what Gaten Mackenzie talks about. Mabahambe, mabahambe, man, mabahambe. The fact that the political will to solve this particular issue seems to be non-existent. Theories. Why would a government that went out, asked for votes, and seemingly is just not interested, number one, in the stats, in the data, because you cannot run a country if you do not know the numbers. Stats SA is spewing out these numbers and so on. Why? What is the end game? What is happening? What is Treasury busy with here? First of all, what is the Reserve Bank busy with? But also politically, in the executive and in the political parties, what are they busy with then? If this is if they're not trying to solve the number one crisis in South Africa, which is 1.1%.
Well, as a deflection from their incompetence, they've gone this public debt fear-mongering. So we've got a debt to GDP ratio of 75%. Okay. It was about 30% when we were growing. Yeah. So now they've created this mass panic around this debt to GDP ratio. But if you look at other countries, there is no universe, Ndumiso and Khomotso, in which we have a high debt ratio. That's number one. If you compare with other countries, Japan 250%, Singapore 176%, rich countries, advanced countries 109%. If you look at our peers, Egypt 91%, Brazil 90%.
Really?
I can go on and on. Brazil 90%, India 83%. And so forth. So every country in the wake of COVID got an increase in debt because they said we are going to do whatever it takes to counter this crisis. So number one, debt is measured. It's a ratio. It's debt to GDP. So the rising debt ratio is a side order or a symptom of an economy that doesn't grow. If you're growing at 1% and your cost of capital, we have one of the highest interest rates in the world. Right. 8% currently at short-term interest rates, Reserve Bank, real after inflation interest rate. It is so obviously the debt ratio is going to grow. So the solution to this issue is to grow the economy and create jobs. And the great economist Keynes, he invented macroeconomics. He said, if you look after unemployment, the debt ratio takes care of itself because you're creating jobs. The 12.3 million people who we must create jobs for, what are they going to be doing? They're going to be producing goods and services that we're not producing currently, and the economy will be much larger than it is now. So the debt ratio will come down if we look after GDP. So we are focusing on the wrong things. I met the finance minister, where was it, at Luthuli House recently, end of last year. Yeah. And he says, no, I agree with you. We don't have I've been going on. We don't have a debt problem. We have a GDP growth problem. So I said, but now, if you agree with me, why are you implementing the opposite.
So why are the policies not reflecting
on the growth,
that understanding
yes,
of what the actual
of the
problem,
urgency to growth? So that is, so I just, so back to this issue that the VAT increase. So they're just going to take away the 2% VAT increase, and then they're going to introduce other cuts. So now we are growing at 1.51%, let's say this year. So how do we get out of this hole? You have to put new money into the economy. So I reject this false narrative that we must substitute this VAT increase with another cut of spending, because cutting spending is what got us into this crisis. Before I was coming here, I was doing some analysis of the budget, preparing for you guys. And then I was looking up, so that we look at real per person spending by the government. From 2015, real real non-interest per capita spending went down by 10%. Infrastructure spending since 2015, real per capita, public investment, 40%. So that is why our cities and towns throughout the country are collapsing. We are not investing in our people and our infrastructure. So during that earlier period, when we were growing, consumption spending was increasing by 5% a year. Investment was increasing by 14% a year. So the solution to the problem is actually simple. And I tell South Africans every day, you stop this domkop austerity and you start investing in your people and your infrastructure, the jobs we start creating immediately.
So here's a question for you.
And there is no catch, Komoto.
My question is, typically when a phenomenon like this happens, when a country is like going through huge problems financially, there's a small group of people who benefit.
Yes.
Somewhere along the line, somebody is benefiting from the incompetence that is being created by the ruling party. Who's benefiting right now from this huge unemployment, from the fact that our city is rubbish?
It's rubbish.
Joburg amanyala. Okay? There's not a single robot that works. It is a crime-infested, filthy armpit of a city that's supposed to be world class. Who benefits from South Africa and Johannesburg in particular rotting to the core?
You reminding me, we were at Zimbabwe once. I was with a family in Zimbabwe, and we're at the Meikles Hotel. And it was the worst. In Zimbabwe, you go there each time, you think it can't get worse.
Right.
And then I ended up talking to the people in the hotel, in the bar, in the Meikles, and they were the guys who traded in petrol. They were making money, and a lot of them were in the hotel, and they were like looking really good, and you could tell, they're making. So in South Africa, it's hard to tell because there is this thing that they call structural reforms, where they're, it's code for privatization, deregulation, and liberalization of energy, electricity, water,
free market,
transport. It's a free market paradise. So, so that's what I'm trying to say. But the point is, even if you add up those things, Komoto, and as I do from time to time, so President Ramaphosa is telling us that this is our strategy. It's called Operation Vulindlela, and we're creating opportunities for the private sector. So this creates opportunities for the big business, and a few of them, not the majority of businesses, black and white, benefit from these policies. So there's a few people in Busa, friends of, and they say we've got a hotline to the president. We can do whatever we want. So it's a small group of people who are benefiting from this Operation Vulindlela. But if you add up, this is supposedly a growth strategy. But what kind of strategy, because I do the numbers all the time, depends on one sector, renewable energy. Because it's impossible. And even if you add up all the renewable energy investments that are planned under this Operation Vulindlela, it doesn't shift the dial. We are an 8 trillion rands economy, and the investments that you're talking about, Kulama IPPs, they're not going to make much of a difference. And then Transnet, they're refusing to invest in Transnet. And they are privatizing Transnet. They're refusing. I was listening to some person told me in the industry, there's a plan to the Kumba iron ore line,
to
concession it to private sector. It's the most profitable part of Eskom. And there are people lining up for that, this privatization.
So it's not a conspiracy theory.
I don't know. No, I'm not. I'm just saying.
No, I'm just.
Yeah. So Eskom. Transnet. It makes its money through these, dedicated lines: the coal line, the manganese line, and then the iron ore line. So now they want to concession them to the private sector, and then Transnet's profits are going to go to the private sector, and the rest of Transnet will be a dog that makes losses and losses. Because private sector, by definition, it creams off prime customers and the ones who can pay, and then they leave the rest of the dogs for the government to sort out here. So this myth that they believe that so they don't even want to invest in the distribution infrastructure. They're talking about internet, what's it called? ITPs or something. The IPPs for energy, for the transmission lines.
Yes.
What madness is that? It is absolute madness. So it's this privatization, but it doesn't even benefit the majority of black or white businesses. The white small businesses, it benefits a few people.
A few
oligarchs,
connected people. Yeah. That's it.
Here's another question that I have for you. Is there a cost? I don't know if this is the kind of stuff you can get from Status or collate in one way or another. What is the true cost of corruption in South Africa?
Yeah.
Because we've had the decimation of SOEs, okay? And you read about corruption literally every day. And it's so common that we hardly even flinch anymore. It's just sort of like, typical. You know what I'm saying?
Another parliamentary committee that says, what happened to the 23 billion? And everyone's going,
but yet there's nobody gets charged for it, and none of the money ever gets recouped.
And your question is, can it be monetized?
Can we quantify it?
How much are we losing to money that just evaporates?
The problem I think I would rely on the Auditor General's reports, the latest one. And I was asking a friend that I need to sit down with you and explain it to me at the Auditor General's, because a lot of the figures on the cost of corruption, they just don't make sense to me. Like they would say that when Nhlanhla when the president fired Nhlanhla, we lost 500 billion. No, 500 billion rands. But when you look at the details, that is not true, because the stock market and the bond market recovered within 3 weeks of that. And the collapse within Nhlanhla, it coincided with something else, where the US Federal Reserve, it determines what happens in the world, stock markets throughout the world. They increased interest rates for the first time in 8 years, So, but it is endemic, from the small people, asking you for cold drink to the people at the top, It's endemic. But unfortunately, my sister's on the anti-corruption task team, so Utandega. So I must talk to her about it. But I haven't seen a reliable number that puts a proper number that I can believe in, because let me just put it, the numbers that I've seen don't make sense, because Steenhuisen in Parliament, he said it's 4.9 trillion in its debate. Then I went and Googled it.
So the cost, he
said 4.9,
4.9 trillion.
And then I Googled it. Where did he get this 4.9 trillion? And then I got to the source, and the source actually doesn't say 4.9 trillion. The speechwriter made a mistake. 4.9 trillion, I think, was the GDP of the country at the time. And then the number that they were putting was about 1.5 trillion in the source.
So here's my question. It's two questions, but they linked, right? Just going back a little bit. You were talking about Treasury and you were talking about the Reserve Bank. Everything that you have been saying here right now, right? It sounds completely rational. And I would imagine, and I can say this, and so you can hide behind me. I can say that the governor of the Reserve Bank is someone who very well educated. Is it London School of Economics? Exactly. So
he's a nice person as well.
And then awesome guy.
But he yells a little bit too much for my liking. But that's just an aside, right? But my point there being, if he knows if he's privy to the same exact figures that you have, right? So we're talking now about the 75% debt to GDP ratio and so on. And if he knows this and he knows these numbers about similar economies, because every time I read about it, say in the Business Times and so on, people talk about the fact that it's almost like it's an ideological thing.
You're 100%.
That it's ideological. But what's the end game? Is he just doing it just purely because he wants to sit there and does things by whatever textbook from the London School of Economics? What is at play? Why can't he just do exactly what you're saying, which is to say, let's just look at the GDP and just grow the GDP, because it makes sense for even a grade 10 student.
You can't say my mandate. So you can't have a central bank that is, that's not aligned with the national objective. So the national objective is grow the economy and create jobs. No, the Reserve Bank can't be immune from that. So no institution in South Africa should say it's not my business. That's number one. Number two, we saw during the global financial crisis, during COVID, central banks became involved in their economies. So in the global financial crisis, they started buying government debt on the secondary market. They started printing money to support their governments, buying debt and then in COVID, the global stimulus packages were $17 trillion. And most of that, I think 80%, was financed by the central bank. The example I use, for example, the US stimulus was about $5 trillion. They gave cash checks to many people throughout.
I remember
this. Yeah, cash checks, like
$5 trillion.
$5 trillion.
And ours was
and
how
half
much?
of we'll come back to that.
Okay, right.
Half of that was from the US Fed. They gave checks to people for all sorts of reasons. The UK one, it was 350 billion pounds. 97% of that came from the Bank of England. The Euro zone, 1 trillion euros. 83% come from the European Central Bank. So a central bank, a proper central bank, can provide financing to the government. That's number one. Number two, a proper central bank can reduce the cost of government borrowing. So the Financial Times wrote about it during COVID, that what happens is that in Japan, for example, Australia, governments, they go to the bond market every week, and they, like here, I think it was 10% the last time I looked. So the government, to shorten quickly, they would say, okay, manje tina siyatenga, we're going to offer you 6% government.
Yeah.
And then that's it. So the private sector,
why are we not doing it?
They set the interest rate. So we can set the interest rate. We can finance government spending. We can invest in the development finance institutions, the IDC, the National Empowerment Fund, which hasn't had funding from the government since 2004 when they started. So we can do so many things if we start thinking creatively. And the last one, we've got this, what I call the SA Inc. balance sheet. Public Investment Corporation, assets of 3 trillion. The UIF has, during COVID, they paid 60 billion rands to 13.8 million people who were temporarily unemployed. In that kitty, there is still 137 billion if you read that withdrawn budget. 137 billion. We can invest a lot of that in jobs. The second thing is the Government Employees Pension Fund. I looked at it over the past 12 years until 2024. They accumulated surpluses of 645 billion rands. 54 billion rands.
A surplus?
Yeah, surplus. Every single year, 54 billion rands. 600, and the funding in the Government Employees Pension Fund is 400 billion rands above the target set by its own trustees. So what I'm trying to say, between the Reserve Bank, the PIC, the GEPF, if we really wanted to get this economy growing, and the numbers I'm talking are billions, but what we need to get this economy growing is a fraction of all the numbers that I'm telling you. Why can't we just get this economy going now? We can do that tomorrow. I just don't get it, Ndumiso and Khomotso. I just don't.
So you cannot explain it.
Yeah, I can't explain it because a politician in a normal country they want to be re-elected. But these politicians, they don't want to be re-elected, because if you look at the DA, it's like a comedy show. They launched their version of the budget, which made no sense whatsoever. Like, the things that we're proposing have got nothing to do with growing the economy. It's just things they hate, And then the same with the ANC. What is being proposed now in this discussion, nothing to do with growing the economy and creating jobs. So it's a lose-lose situation for these two parties. And we have to, I don't know, man.
I think you were trying to say, maybe this business model is not working for South Africa.
Yes.
It may be great for London, and it's a problem that our
but
leaders
even
went
London,
to the
but
School
even
of
London
Economics,
doesn't doing. Even London's not doing it.
But we need to think differently and come up with a model that will work for us.
For us, yes. Because we, economists, we like benchmarking against other countries. But you're right, Khomotso. I benchmark against other countries, but at the end of the day, it is about us. It's got nothing to do with international bankers. And the example I give is, Jacob Zuma, December 2017, he had listened to everybody, and he says, we're going to have free Treasury. Well, it's free in inverted commas, Treasury. Let's call it what it is. Yeah. And it was implemented 3 months later. 2 months later.
It wasn't it wasn't imperfect, but it was implemented.
It was implemented 2 months later. Yeah. He literally said, before it was just goodbye to us, we will have this 350,000, and then so the NSFAS was funding so many people, and now so it just happened so quickly. And did the sky fall down? No. So all these things that I'm talking about, the sky will not fall down. We will grow the country and create jobs.
When we come back, there's a question I want you to start mulling over during the break, because I want to ask you this question. Then the question is, so basically, are we just being deliberately lied to? Because my understanding of it was, because I wanted to ask you this question, and it was going to be a big question, which was going to be, is the country broke? So don't answer that particular question, because it sounds like the answer is not what I was expecting it, right. But after this.
Welcome back to Still Uncaptured. Still joining us on our conversation is Duma Gqubule, an economist with a very radical mind. But actually, it shouldn't be such a radical idea. The things that you propose seem to make sense. And what you're saying is that our government has the facts, but their actions seem to go completely opposite to what the right thing would be to do in order to remedy the situation. So what is motivating them then? Why would Lesetja Kganyago keep making the decisions that he does when clearly they're not working for the larger public?
Do you know, Khomotso, I think about that almost every day, every week. Uguti, this 18 years of declining average living standards, doesn't it mean everything? Doesn't it mean anything for them? Yeah, surely at some point, when you've been doing the same thing over and over again, and there are no results. I was looking at the State of the Nation address. President Ramaphosa's 10 State of the Nation addresses in 8 years. And everything he says doesn't work. At what point do you, Mr. President, say because every single speech is a different way of packaging what he said in the first speech. So if you reorder and you change the emphasis of what you said in the first speech, you're just reordering what you said in different speeches. At some point, the penny must drop and say, a normal person, guys, says, okay, let's try something different.
And so for me,
that's the part I don't get.
You are a professional in the field. This is what you work with. So you have a duty to be responsible. And so my response to that is going to be to say to you, but this is exactly why you find podcasters who know dangerously little about economics saying, when things cannot be explained, this is exactly how conspiracy theories start to fill that vacuum. When you cannot explain, where you start thinking, what is the end game? Where it's almost a case of, is there a bunch, and I'm talking about the president, I am talking about the Reserve Bank governor, and I'm talking about the Minister of Finance, is that there is some other end game that is happening that I do not know. And I'll say it because I'm just a lowly podcaster. No one cares about what I think, because it seems to me that almost the country is being sold off. It is just being prepped to be carved up into pieces to be given. So basically what we're seeing in America with Elon Musk and Donald Trump, who at least, is so decisive, executive order after executive order, exactly how you were talking about how President Jacob Zuma, and we were told that it's because, he doesn't have a sophisticated mind. He just thinks things are easy. He can just come in there and just say, there will be free education. Remember, people laughed and said, he thinks that's going to be, well, what happened after he did? Exactly like you're saying. So then before we went away, I wanted to ask you this question, because for me, the answer before this conversation would have been, but guys, maybe it's because the country is broke. Is this country broke? Do we not have the money to do the things that we are supposed to be doing to get ourselves from the 1.1% economic growth to even 4? I mean, obviously, in increments, get to 3% in 2 years, get to 4%, and maybe in 10 years we are to 6-7%.
Yeah.
Are we broke? Is this why we cannot do it?
Okay, I get angry. Like the journalist from City Press called me at the weekend, and I said, the government issues the money. All the money in circulation here in Rosebank was issued by the government. So the government can't run out of the currency it issues. That is just completely absurd. So as I explained earlier on, central banks during the global financial crisis, they issued new money to support their economies, and the same after COVID. So another thing that we have a unique privilege, like we're not Sri Lanka or Zimbabwe or Zambia, is that 90% of our debt is denominated in our currency. So only 10, the South African rand. So only 10% is denominated in dollars, So
I did not know.
That. So the 90%, we can't go bankrupt because the government can create money and pay whoever they need to pay in South Africa. That's number one. Yeah. So I just don't, and I can give you examples. So what I say to people is that I give you a menu of options of how to get this country going.
Yeah.
You can't disagree with every single one of them. I've told you about the UIF surplus of 140 billion. We used it in the past. So if we used it in the past, why can't we use it now? So I can go on and on. And then I was looking just before I came. I always check just before I was in the other room. How much cash has government got? It's 200 billion in the budget, the one that was withdrawn. 200 billion cash. So people think, no, Duma, there must be a catch. So we've got 200 billion cash. We've got GEPF 140 billion. Before we talk about anything else, I'm just saying that. So the idea that the government can go broke, it's the most absurd thing I've ever heard. And I get angry when people repeat it to me. And the fact, I do hear the president saying, we are constrained. He says he's been saying this for how many years? He's been president? About 7 years?
About
7 years. Yeah, he's been saying we're constrained. Years, Constrained kanjani, because there are certain things we did during COVID. As I said, the UIF surplus, the government couldn't come up with the reason for the surplus. And then, so in terms of the other question is, but who... the conspiracy theories, I would hear the Uber drivers, during the load shedding.
I love them. They know everything.
Yes. When in doubt, ask an Uber driver.
During load shedding, I used to hear the craziest conspiracy theories about, load shedding, from the Uber drivers, But, I'm thinking the finance minister, he has given 3-4 proposals as to alternatives. I think cabinet rejected one. So he's run out of ideas. And, the more I think, they don't know what they're doing, guys. And I was telling a friend of mine, Uti, you're asking what's the end game.
Yeah.
They care so little about this country and solving the issue. These are the type of people, some of them are nice people. a lot of them are nice people. Nice people one-on-one.
They all are.
Most
of them are actually.
Yeah.
When you meet them, and I've been saying all these things about
people
but when I meet them, it's like this is like a nice guy.
Yeah,
right.
No,
he doesn't have horns coming out of his head.
But I was telling a friend of mine, you know what's going to happen? That, you see a dictator where the people, in Sri Lanka, they kick you out and you have to run out of the country.
Yeah.
That's what's going to happen in South Africa. We're heading for that one day. And I tell people the new president will be someone, Ndumiso and Khomutso, that you've never heard of.
I hope so.
Yeah. It's not going to be the usual suspects, because in a situation of chaos where people are running out of the country and they're forced to run out of the country, that's what happens in the chaos,
And
are you hoping for it?
Yeah.
What? That people are running out?
Well, no, I'm talking about the leaders,
I know.
Because you can see that Lekorotsoana keeps going with a new proposal and it like fails. So I don't know. You're saying what's the end game? They're gonna
where somebody has so much money,
yes,
that they have to put it under a sofa. I think it's okay for you to run out of the country, to be run out of the country.
Yeah, but basically what I was asking is when you're talking about someone you do not know, this is what bothers me.
Okay.
Because in a vacuum, something is going to expand to fill that void.
Sure.
And the problem that I have is that the game seems to me to be set up that whoever's going to expand is going to be someone clearly who has got clout, who has got money. And I do not know.
They all have money. That's the thing. That's another point I wanted to make, is that is there somebody, a cabinet minister who's like, they're all millionaires for all intents and purposes, because and that's part of why I don't think they understand what the common person on the street is going through, is because they're exempt from so many of the disappointments and failures and challenges that each person faces.
The amazing thing is that, like, me and you, all of us, there are amazing South Africans out there,
Plenty.
There are plenty of people who are amazing. Look, when I got out of bed and I wanted to understand what's happening with this budget, I called Busisi Beko. She's 30 years old. On the budget in South Africa, I realized during COVID that, this one, she's 27 then, whatever age is.
Yeah.
She's read about this budget more than all the talking heads you see on TV. This is like a future finance minister. Do you see what I'm saying?
Right.
And there's so many people.
That's what you mean.
And what I mean is that there's so many people who are highly talented in South Africa who know what they're doing. And I just don't, but the people who are in charge, I don't know, they're not the
I
people.
hope some of those people would come out, because so many people were hurt during the 9 wasted years.
Yeah.
Like there was a purging at SOEs of incredibly competent individuals who, given another chance, I don't know if they would dare venture back into politics. That's one point I wanted to make. The second point is that, I'm baffled at the fact that the UIF has such an amazing surplus. Because I'm a freelancer. Try applying for UIF as a freelancer. That's exactly why they have a surplus. Because
the surplus can be used for other purposes.
Just tell you that during COVID, you call people are scared of me. So some people will call me, please help me get this money. And then I'll phone, and a few of them got the money, Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So I must call you.
So here is my thing, right? You are talking about people, now that I understand what you mean by people that you've never heard of. So now, for instance, if we could vote for a new finance minister and I saw Duma Gqubule in the ballot box, I would definitely put my cross around. So let's assume, here's my fantasy. You come in now, you are coming in, and you've been talking about all of this. The first thing for you to do, you remember how Trump, the first day, inauguration,
the
executive orders.
Yeah.
I am giving you now free reign, executive orders. You come in there, you sit down in your office, which I imagine will probably be paperless, knowing you sitting there, and you are supposed to be signing executive orders.
So Minister, this is after you become president.
He becomes,
and you become president, and you elect him,
and I put him in as the Minister of Finance. Let's fix this country right now. First order of business to fix this economy?
Okay. The first thing that you have to do is that you have to get control of the central bank. I don't mean for nefarious purposes.
Yes.
You have to have the central bank and the National Treasury working together. Yeah. So I would say, so if you look at the inflation targeting of the past 24 years, inflation targeting, like I was looking at it, and I'm going to do it one day, is that all the times they've increased inflation, interest rates and cut them, whatever, it's never got to do with, Tina, we've got too much money in our pockets. It's got to do with what we call supply, cost push or supply side inflation. Yeah. So it's some mixture of, the oil price, the currency, food prices, things that the central bank interest rates can't address. So I'm talking to people, I say, now, guys, you don't have to be an economist to know that increasing interest rates, as the central bank governor did, it's not going to reduce the international price of oil. It's not going to reduce food prices. It's not going to change the exchange rate. So why are we doing it?
IMF?
Yeah.
I don't
know.
I'm trying to find reasons for because who is being pandered to.
I looked into this inflation issue throughout COVID, and what we learned from COVID is that the direct measures, they matter more. They provided subsidies to people to be able to pay for the stuff they couldn't afford. It was gas prices in Europe. They provided subsidies to people to, whatever. And in the US, they released some oil from the strategic reserve to bring down the prices. So you do direct things to, address the cost of capital. In the South African context, you would, middle-class South Africans can't afford these Eskom bills. So if I was in charge, I would just say, NERSA, 3.5%, whatever the number is. And we will pay Eskom the difference between the NERSA price determination and 3.5%. And then you also have to subsidize the poor people. They're talking about the statement of intent, cost of living, but they do nothing about it, So, but you did see that they reduced the fuel levy during COVID.
Yes.
Yeah, so those are type of things, direct measures to reduce the cost of capital, not interest rates. Interest rates do not address these issues. So I would get the Reserve Bank and the central bank, because when they work together, they can create magic for this country. And that's what I believe. Yeah.
So you're not so crazy after all, because this one, sometimes, she says things just almost like throwaway. She's like, this 500 billion, if you make the 500 billion.
Okay. You know what? My business day column and all the things I wrote during that 500 billion.
Yeah.
That 500 billion South Africans, there were also conspiracy theories. People are saying we never saw this 500 billion, know? And then I wrote so many. I was talking about it. I was the expert, on this 500
billion. I remember.
Yeah, there was no 500 billion. Yeah. So now let me tell you what actually happened. I did the numbers, okay? So 60 billion, so it's above the line, which is above the budget line, and sorry, and then below the budget line, So the government, how can I put it? Their contribution to the 500 billion was about 27 billion rands through tax, the tax measures and direct spending. So that was the government's contribution above the budget line, know. And that slippage, what we call spending slippage or whatever, was far less than what you do in a normal year.
Okay.
Yeah. When the government says we have revenue shortfalls and versus Oshincha during the medium term budget, that was less than what happens in a normal year. And then I looked from 2020 to 2024, government real per capita non-interest spending cut by 16%. So the government didn't really make a contribution. So that most of that money came from the UIF, 60 billion rands, and that flop of what's it called? The guarantee fund. So the government guaranteed 200 billion rands to the banks for them to provide loans. And the loans they provided were about 20 billion rands, if I remember well. So it's 60 billion rands, 20 billion rands, 60 billion rands.
So 200 billion was available, but 20 was given.
Yeah, they only took up 20. And that's another story, guys. You are trying to get funding for your property, and would they fund you? I don't know. Yeah, but I'm just saying South Africans every day are fighting. Grappling. Entrepreneurs trying to get funding, and there's a guarantee, and the banks didn't take up the guarantee, and we're so stupid. We never even put conditions on the bank. With Ilemali, you must use it for loans for black people, because we know that most of those 20 billion rands of loans went to white people. Yes. I don't have to be an expert to know that's not what happened. So if any black person who got that loan, you must call me.
Write to us.
Write to us, to Uncaptured.
We gotta wrap this up, guys. We
don't have a live line, guys. Otherwise, people would phone in.
Oh my God, we could have this conversation for quite a while.
So here it is. It's 60 plus 20 plus 27. So it was 107 billion rands. It was 20% off the 500 billion rand. So what you have is a president who, a lot of what the president says, Treasury cancels. This is why I'm saying that this institution is so arrogant and so powerful. They have disdain for even what the president said, because they canceled his stimulus. And then on top of that, he said, September 2018, infrastructure fund, 400 billion. And we're scratching our heads with and then they canceled it. 6 years, then 100 billion the next year. That's what Treasury says. 6 years later, 2025, there's not a cent in that fund, So I'm just saying that, so the most important thing is to get all the, and then on the jobs, Mina, I'm a big believer in public employment programs. We've got 3 public employment programs. It's the expanded public works program, the community works program. We've also got the presidential employment stimulus. And by the way, the Treasury cut the funding for those by 14 billion rands in the last budget. And the president used to talk about this presidential employment stimulus, his favorite project, and basic education, the teacher assistants. They didn't hire them last year. 250,000 were not hired. Yeah. What logic is there? These are people who have peace jobs, what we call peace jobs. These are part-time. So it's a spectrum of jobs. So I would merge these 3 public employment programs, create one institution, and I would start funding them to expand public employment. Because if the government does everything I say they must do, and we grow at 6%, there's still going to be millions of unemployed people. Do you know what I'm saying? So we must also create these public employment opportunities, infrastructure, and then there must also be budgets for skills training for these people. There must be exit pathways to an economy that's growing. So I would merge these 3 institutions. There's this thing called employment tax incentive. It's like a basic income grant for employers because it doesn't create jobs. I would cancel it and put it into this institution. And then I would take some of the UIF surplus and put it into this institution. It would be run like community, public, private partnership, like the Solidarity Fund, Gloria Robert, during COVID, And we never heard of even a cent being stolen there. But this is what I'm saying. It was well run, professionally managed with civil society oversight. So we need to innovate because, as you said earlier, with the corruption, people have lost faith in everything that the government does. Because when I come up with this, you know what people say? They say, okay, Duma, I agree with you, but not this ANC government, So
we always have conditions, don't we?
But so anyway, that's what Duma, people say. Yeah.
We gotta wrap this up.
Thank you so much.
I'm so sorry.
Okay.
We could, but I promise you what?
Yeah.
We will have you back.
Thank you so much.
And
guys.
me, I'm supporting Dumiso with Duma for finance minister.
No.
Any day.
I'm too lazy. Yeah.
But now, how can I go? It's a mawas.
As they always do.
Guys,
yeah. Anyway, we are in the dark. Thank you so much for joining us. Do interact with us on all our social media platforms, and we'll see you next time.